Hello and welcome to the Horror Within Me show with your host, me, Foxy Batman. And this is my unique unpacking of my own personal trauma and how I relate that to my passion for all things horror. Full disclaimer, this is a show that uses strong language, dark humor, sarcasm, and uncomfortable topics while I also pick a specific movie, TV show, book, or anything that falls under the category of the horror genre, and I compare that with my perception and personal trauma to that media. So, if this sounds like the type of show you're into, then welcome. I hope you enjoy. If not, no problem. Everyone has their own taste, and I'm sure you'll find a show that's right for you. Okay, with that being said, let's dive into my weird, wacky brain and see where we end up. Hi, and welcome back, everyone, to The Horror Within Me. I am your host, Foxy Batman, and this is episode 2. Um, for those of you who joined us last week for episode 1, New Year, New Trauma, I had my friend Grace come and kind of bounce back and forth on the conversations of trauma, horror genre, the media, things like that. Um, this week's episode is going to be a little different. It's going to be more story based, where I will reflect on a specific time in my life, more specifically when I was 14. That age is a crucial part of my story and things that happened in my life that I associate and carry with me to this day. A lot of life changing moments then, so I want to focus on that. And around that time period, I received for Christmas a camcorder. It was very popular. Everyone, I had a close friend of mine, and he wanted one for Christmas. I wanted one for Christmas because we were best friends. We were also in competition, um, and the camcorder was extremely pivotal in my upbringing because of my horror, passion. And movies such as the Blair Witch Project which was released in 1999, and that was like a found footage thing, and that I'd never seen before. So I remember relating specifically to that movie, and that movie traumatized me when I first saw it at 13, 14 years old. For those of you who have never seen the Blair Witch Project, there's a quick little description I found on the Wikipedia page. It is a fictional story of three student filmmakers, Heather, Michael, Joshua. They hike in the Black Hills in Maryland in 1994 to film a documentary about the Blair Witch. They disappear. They find their equipment a year later, and it's the recovered footage is the entire film. So I thought that it was a true story because it says based on a true story, just to kind of get us. I remember watching it in the attic of my sister's bedroom with her and being terrified. I didn't sleep in my room. Um, I can't believe that we were able to watch this thing unfold in front of us, and it was just very traumatizing as a child to think that I was watching these three people be, tormented and basically killed on screen. Um, so that really stayed with me. And the movie is a classic. It has two sequels. I actually, never saw the Blair Witch, the new one. I saw Book of Shadows, which I enjoyed. Um, there was also a video game, I think, that was coming out that I was very interested in checking out. Haven't done it yet. For those of you who did, again, listen to episode 1, I do stream on Twitch under the name Foxy Batman 21 with two X's. And I stream horror games. Right now, I'm basically just streaming Dead by Daylight, which is, you know, my my go-to outlet of video game release. So maybe I'll check out the Blair Witch. I don't know if anyone here is listening and you have tried the Blair Witch game. Um, Drop a comment, let me know what your thoughts are. But anyway, back to the topic of found footage and how that shaped that generation, my generation. Movies came out after that, such as like Paranormal Activity, which they did. That was also terrifying to me. That's just so inventive. Cloverfield was another one. That one was I thought it was okay. Not my favorite, but you know, everyone has their own taste. So let me jump into the topic of my personal experiences and back to being the age of 14. Um, for those again who listened to episode 1, it was a very generalized idea of type of things I dealt with growing up, but there are specific instances that stay with me. And as I said, the age of 14 is a huge life-changing events took place. So let's jump back there. We're looking at the year about 2000. I was about 14. For those of you who don't know me, who are new to this, I was born and raised in Trenton, New Jersey. It's an urban city in New Jersey, the capital of New Jersey. Um, I grew up, I don't want to say poor because I don't like that term. I wasn't that we were poor. My dad had a good job. My dad was a corrections officer. My mom stayed at home. The problems were within their marriage and their relationship. So growing up, we would have been fine if other factors weren't at play. So with that being said, I remember I was very spoiled. My mom got me whatever I wanted. My dad took me wherever I wanted to go. So it was a interesting time. So being 14, my mom had really developed into her alcoholism at this point. So I remember um, just kind of doing my own thing at this point. I had this idea of what life was going to be like as a child. I was going to grow up. I was going to stay in school, get good grades, graduate, go to college like you're supposed to. And then I was going to meet a girl, get married. We're going to buy a house, have children. The American dream, what you're taught what I was taught as a young age is what you would do to become successful in life. Um, so things started going differently for me very early on, obviously with my sexuality and being confused. So the ideas that I thought I was supposed to be having weren't working out that way. I was a very good student. Many people called me the teacher's pet. um, my biggest complaint is that I talk too much. Shocker. So at 14, I was starting my freshman year at high school, and I remember I went to public schools my whole, elementary and middle school, and all of my friends that I had gone to school with the last, 8 years of my life were going to Trenton High, which was the only public school in the area, but I was going to the Catholic school in McCorston. So it was a new experience with a whole new type of crowd of people that I had not been around before in my life because they had been coming from the Catholic school background. So I was excited and nervous to meet new people. It was also, I had to wear a uniform and learn to tie a tie and things like that that I just hadn't done in the past. So, starting off that itself was a very interesting point in my life. I remember being made fun of at first because my clothes were too big, because I like to dress in baggy shirts and pants because that was like the style of the guys in my neighborhood. But obviously, when I got to this Catholic school with the preppy people, that just wasn't the case. So I instantly stood out as, you know, dressing differently than they did, and obviously being kind of feminine and just trying to figure out, all right, how am I going to get through this? All right, I already knew how to navigate the Trenton public school system. I had a group of people and I had close people that I stuck to, so I had my survival skills there. I didn't have survival skills here. So what do I do? How do I make this work? And so I remember being kind of lost at the time. My one sister and me were kind of close, and so she had recently had a child. She had a kid when she was 16, and she had um, stayed home. And I remember we got very close, and I got very close with her son he was a baby, but it was so fun and interesting to me um, to have a baby around because I was the youngest. Um, and so we would stay up and we would play video games. More specifically on the GameCube, we would play like Mario Party and things like that. But also, I was escaping away from what was happening in the household, which with my parents fighting all the time, we would stay up, and I began to drink alcohol with her. And I remember we would sit up and we would drink Mad Dog 2020. And anyone out there that's ever had that knows that that is disgusting. It's just not. But at 14, I mean, we would drink anything. You know what I mean? She was obviously, she's 4 years older than me, so she was an adult, but that's neither here nor there. Um, but we would sit up, we would drink, we would play video games. I would get up, go to school. She would pick me up from school. My mom would drop me off in the morning. Um, but the the navigation through high school there was just I met a girl who had actually been in my public school system, which I don't remember her name, but it was I remember being very comforted that okay, she remembered me. I didn't remember her, but she remembered me, and it was like, okay, I have an ally here, and I can I have a connection to my other life with this life, so let's make that connection somehow. And apparently she had this crush on me, and so I was like, okay, let's just make her my girlfriend. Let's just do that. So that way, let's make her an important part of my circle. So that way I have someone here. I didn't really find her attractive. Not that she wasn't bad looking, just not for me, obviously. Um, but I did what I thought I was supposed to do. Like obviously I'm in high school, I have a girlfriend, I'm gonna be cool. But I don't even, we never even kissed once. I don't even remember dating her. I remember just asking her to be my girlfriend, and then she just wasn't, and we just never spoke. Like, it was the strangest relationship, if you can call it that. Like, maybe she's still my girlfriend to this day. I don't know. Maybe we never broke up. I don't know wherever she is. How you doing, bestie? But very interesting. But let me back up a little bit. Um, because I'm jumping around, but you have to kind of get the picture of the school and home life to kind of understand my mindset through this. Um, so I remember I was only in this school for less than one school year. And the reason being, goes back to my parents. And like I said, we were not poor. My dad had good money, but things happen that changed the course of what was happening in life. So my dad began an affair with a lady in the neighborhood who happened to be on drugs and a prostitute, but also a close family friend. She was the aunt of my best friend's family. Like she was close. Her kids and us, we all played together. But I was under the impression like I knew that she was on drugs, but I didn't, like I said, understand, what everything meant completely. Like my mom was an alcoholic, this lady was a drug addict, but these were also like they made us laugh. They were good people. They weren't terrible people. They just were do these things that make them do terrible things. Um, so my dad began this affair, if you want to call it an affair, but he was start spending all his money on this woman, and we didn't know what was happening. But I remember um, my mom started to get very nervous because we were getting foreclosure. No, things on our home. They owned our home that we grew up in. Um, and I remember starting to feel inside like my foundation was shaking, um, because I didn't understand. It was my safe place. My home was all I've known. And I remember driving to North Jersey with her, trying to speak to, I guess, I don't know, someone that saves house as a lawyer. I don't know, but she paid him all this money. But, you know, this is what was going on. And I remember in school, I was doing really well. And I remember I had finally found my way, and I found a group of friends, and it was right before Easter break, so we're talking March or April, that a disciplinarian came up to me and told me that I had to leave school. I was being expelled from school, and I just was not sure. And they escorted me to my locker to clean out my locker, and I had to leave. And I found out that it was because they my dad had been lying and he hadn't been making the payments to the school. Instead, he was just giving this money to this woman for sex and drugs and whatever else. And it broke me. It completely broke me because I was happy. I had a school that I was nervous about that I finally found my way in. I had friends, and it was embarrassing. I was doing well, and to make matters worse, not only was I removed from this school now, but the following school year, I would have to go to Trenton High, and now I would have to repeat the ninth grade because my dad owed money and didn't pay. And until he paid that money, which I don't know what the amount was to this day, I still don't know what it was. Until he paid that money, they wouldn't release my transcripts, which means that my whole freshman year basically never happened and I had to start over. So not only was I taken from a new school with new friends, I put into a new school with old friends. I was not even on their grade level anymore. So now, again, from no fault of my own, am I sitting here trying to figure out why this is happening to me. And in this time frame, my dad had moved out and gotten an apartment. And apparently, I remember my mom getting a knock on the door from a family friend, and he basically told her that my dad had gotten the woman pregnant and she had a baby girl, and that it was my father's. And I remember my mom being completely broken, and I was just so lost as to now I'm thinking, so now I have a sister. How does this work? Like, what is going to happen? I was the youngest child um, at the time, and I was not ready to accept that, and I hated my father. I hated him so much for doing this to us, and I also hated my mom for not making the right choices because she, like I said, she just drank and fought and got angry all the time. And then I'm like, I thought things would be better when he left, but she was too far gone in her disease at that point. So she still would fight with my sisters and me and call him and start all this drama. So I had no outlet. I had no school because I didn't know what was happening. And I had my parents who were hating each other and my dad who had this child outside of his marriage, even though they separated, the affair was going on. And it was just a very traumatic thing happening. And so I remember just trying to figure things out. So I started going over to my father's apartment. Try to, you know, try to escape the screaming and fighting at my main home with my mom because even though my dad did all these horrible things, when I went to his apartment with my friends, he wasn't fighting, but I felt a sense of betrayal towards my mom because he was there with this woman and this other woman who was a grandmother of my best friend. She was a wonderful woman, but she stayed with him too. And I remember just being there, but I felt at least a little bit more calm in that situation because like I said, it wasn't so much of the screaming and everything. Like I knew what was happening there to an extent, but I would just go away into the room upstairs and try to find a place for myself there. So looking back, it was interesting. Remember, I still wanted him to stop dealing with this woman. I may be thinking if I'm there, I can kind of try to maneuver a situation. I don't know. I really wasn't helpful bouncing between the two because I just got even more confused because when I was over at my father's, I had more anger and hatred towards my mom, and she would call me. I don't even remember conversations, but I remember screaming at her and telling her that I wasn't coming home. Like just very hurtful, angry things that would come out of my mouth to this woman. And so during that time, I had to find other ways to express myself and escape this traumatic experience. And what I started doing is I had this camcorder that I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, and what I did was I started to create this horror movie that I asked my friends and my sister's boyfriend to help me star and shoot, right? So it was called The Olden Horror because I just try to backtrack and think of my favorite horror movies, like A Nightmare on Elm Street, and Olden was the name of the street I grew up on. So like we'll call it The Olden Horror, and we'll base it off of all my favorites, like Jason, Freddy, Michael, Halloween, like all that stuff. And it was terrible, by the way. And I do not have any um, evidence that it ever existed. Thank God I did not grow up in the era of online streaming and YouTube, because if I would have put this thing out to the world, I feel bad for the kids today because it would be embarrassing and probably follow me forever. Um, but it was a fun experience for me. I remember just thinking of different scenes, and I was a terrible actor. Couldn't act to save my life. It was just watching it. I remember thinking like, I'm I'm a boy, but I want to be like the final girls in the movie. So how does that work? And it just didn't work. It didn't work at all. But anyway, um, during this trauma and everything that was happening at nighttime, when my mom would be passed out, is when most of the time we would create these movies, or when she picked up her part-time job at ShopRite as a cashier and nobody would be home and I didn't have school, obviously. So we would make these movies or make these scenes for the movies. Um, and it was in my childhood home for the first two. I can't remember the second one at all. I just remember the first one. I remember being in the living room and being dragged across the living room into the dining room area and the kitchen, all this stuff, and then the backyard with my friend scene where he was like drowned in my nephew's kiddie pool, like just real ridiculous things. But it was important to me because I was not just making this horror movie, but I was capturing, you know, elements of my childhood home, like the bedroom where we would just sit and videotape ourselves saying doing stupid things. This movie where even though I'm acting out a scene, I can you know save this image because ultimately we did end up um, losing our home, and it was it was sad because I remember feeling very helpless. And right before the loss of our home, another major thing did happen, and it was my father. After the daughter was born, the mom was not allowed custody because of the drug issue, and he had asked my sister to move in, my one sister to move in with her and her son to help him with the daughter, and she refused. She couldn't do that to my mom, and she just didn't, she couldn't do it. Um, but she was in foster care with a wonderful couple, and he decided that he was going to place her up for adoption. It was going to be an open adoption, and that was a decision that was made. Um, Obviously, I was, too young at the time to know all the logistics and how that was decisions came to but so that happened, and then shortly after, he suffered a major stroke. I remember being woke up I was sleeping at bunk beds, and I was sleeping on the top bunk, and I remember my mom waking me up, or somebody waking me up, telling me that he had a major stroke in the morning. But this happened overnight, and they let me sleep, and nobody told me. But he almost died. It was really bad, and he had to go to rehab, and it changed his life because he never fully recovered. He had permanent damage from it. He couldn't speak well. He began having seizures, and this was a direct result. He had high blood pressure, and he had not been taking the medicine the way he had supposed to be. So now my mother had a decision as his wife, what to do with him, and she brought him back home. And I thought, wow, this woman, after all that, he had done to her, the physical abuse, the emotional abuse, the cheating, the having a child, um, I mean, she could have at any point after he had moved out just tried to navigate and find a way to, heal and better herself, but she hadn't. She got stuck, and this man that did all this horrible stuff to her that she had claimed to not love anymore, she still had love for because in his time of need, she was there and she brought him home. And she, I thought that that was a testament to what she perceived to be what you do in a marriage. Unfortunately, it didn't help the situation because she didn't get better with her alcoholism and she couldn't let go of things that happened and continued. They still would begin fighting again, and now I'm back in the same situation. So there were, having the fights. When he's out, still going to see this woman because he's still seeing her and still giving her the money. My mom's working part time at ShopRite. I'm making these horror movies, and all this stuff is happening in this huge circle of chaos because that's the only way to describe it. It was pure chaos, um, and leading up to losing the house, that was major for me too because as I said, I had already lost school, and this was my safest place. This is where I could just go and be at home. It was the most, even though it was traumatic there and it was fighting, my space, my room, that was my safe space. And so I remember when we had to leave, I didn't, we didn't, nothing was planned the way it should be. I know my mom tried to save it. I don't know how long that she knew that we had, but I do know that we only had 24 hours to clean that house out. And we're talking 24 hours to clean out a house that at this point I had been at I was 15 now, 15 years for me personally, and I know they were there for at least a year or so before that. So we're looking at 16, 17 years of memories and photographs. I remember the attic. There's two rooms up there, and the second room was full of all like the decorations for the holidays, but also just bags and paper bags filled with photos, all of our photos, and all of our ornaments for our Christmas tree that had everything our baby's first Christmases and things throughout the years that were up there. But our focus wasn't getting that out. Our focus was getting out furniture and um, my one sister, I don't remember where she was, but it was me and the one that was close that we drank with, her boyfriend, his cousins, and my mom for a little bit. And then she ended up, I think, passing out somewhere at the new place that we ended up finding to rent, which was a couple blocks away from where I was living, but in a much worse part of Trenton compared to what I was used to and where we were. Um, but moving back and forth throughout the night, it was just at some point we got just overtired and we never made it to the third floor back room and basically left all of our memories that we could have. There were no more pictures or ornaments or any of that, and that basically was lost to the foreclosure. And I guess they cleaned it out and just trashed everything. I don't know what they do with those items. I don't see why they would keep them. I always had kind of hoped to drive by and see during the time to see like what would be put out for trash and maybe grabbing it because I felt very sad. I kept losing everything that was comfortable to me. And you got to remember too, I'm also battling with my sexuality and trying not to acknowledge the fact that I'm gay. I had known, but I didn't want to be. I had I had to not be gay. That was just I couldn't do that to myself, and I never would admit it because once you admit it, that's it, right? So I have no strong, um, you know, type of concrete foundation to be on. I'm in this new space. I lost my home. I lost my school. My parents are just getting worse. My dad is handicapped at this point. My mom is just no longer a mother. She's just a shell of a woman who just comes home and drinks gallons of wine out of styrofoam cups. My sisters have, now my oldest sister, she has a daughter. My other sister has her son. And and then there's me who just hangs out with them, and we stay up all night and we would get drunk and we would play video games and we would make movies, horror movies, because like I said, horror movies were my escape. That's what I would do. So I would recreate scenes from movies or recreate what I wanted to do. But I remember looking back at the first two movies that I made, not watching them because I thought they were good, but watching them because they were filmed in my childhood home, and I would just watch them and fantasize about being back home where it was safe for me in some element, and it was just very sad. I was very unhappy. Um, Everything I'd ever known or thought life to be was not at all going the way that it was supposed to. And so my third escape is I became close with the adoptive parents of my sister. I would want to spend time with her. She was an infant. She wouldn't even remember this, but I would go over to their house, um, and I would spend the night there with my two friends, and that was the most normal part of that time for me, which is so strange because it's neither parent, it's not a family friend, but it's these people that accepted my sister, and not just her, but like had accepted our family and allowed me to be in her life. Obviously, she had no idea what was going on, and growing up, that's for another episode. But I got to go away from the chaos and be in this situation, um, and be with these people. They would take us shopping. We would do a lot of things, and I really thank them for providing that escape. I'm sure that they also knew what was happening, and I didn't think of it at the time as how it was going to be. But I do remember my mom meeting them, and she met my sister one time in the back seat of the car. These people were just saviors. So I remember going over there, and I would put on shows with my friends. We would do like lip syncs and all this stuff. So that was a comforting time for me, in a time of uncomfortableness. And this shift in my life that has opened this door into reality of what my life is now has shaped who I was becoming and who I ended up being for quite some time. So my life now was I didn't have the dream to be, the great student, to go to college, to get married, to do anything, honestly. Um, I think I slipped away, and my dreams were shattered when we lost the house and I lost my school and I lost what I thought reality was. And so I escaped with my sister into this drinking, partying kind of life. I remember I started smoking weed, and I would buy so much weed, um, because I would get social security checks from my father because of his disability from the stroke. I would get $850 a month, and my mom would just cash the check and give it to me. They would just give me the money. They didn't save it. They didn't stash it for away from me for any funding. They just like I said, at this point in life, there were no structures. There were no disciplinarians. There were no consequences. I just did what I want. I was smoking cigarettes, getting drunk, getting high, just doing, at 14, 15, thinking, I'm an adult now and I could just do what I want. And in reality, I'm a child, but I'm in this environment. But anyway, I would use it to upgrade my things. I bought new gaming systems, new stereo systems. But there was still a slight sense of who I was gonna be in me, because I do also remember my first check that I got from my dad's disability that I got from me because I was under the age of 18. I was going to be receiving this money, but they retro pay it, and the first check that I got was for $8,000. $8,000 for a 15-year-old. And it was just, here you go. Um, I did give my mom money for a couple bills. Bought her a stereo system because she loved music and loved listening to things. So I got her this really nice stereo system that at the time you could put like, I think it was 60 different CDs in it, kind of like a jukebox. I thought it was so cool. I bought that for her, and I really spoiled my one nephew. Oh, I mean, he was like my baby brother or like a kid of mine. we were very close. I bought him his first gaming system. I bought him a car, bed. I just spent a lot of money on him too. But in this chaos, I we would buy a lot of alcohol, a lot of weed, and we would just sit up and party. And so, second year of high school, freshman year of high school at this point, I no longer cared. I didn't want to be in Trenton High. I knew none of these people. I didn't I was in this school was massive. So I didn't really see any of the people that I had gone to school with before because they were now sophomores in 10th grade. I was freshman in a different part of this school. And so I had a friend who also just wasn't, you know, really the best student or the person that, he's one of my friends that I partied with. So he was my best friend. And one day he asked if I wanted to, cut school. And I was scared, I was nervous, but I also thought about it and I was like, you know what? Why am I here? I already did this class at McCorston, already did these things, and I don't want to do it again. That's how my mind was. I don't want to be here. So I left. That school was so easy. You could just walk out the doors. The security guards didn't care. It was really just no structure. So I would just walk out and we would start cutting school. And I would go to the cemetery. If you listen to episode one, I mentioned that. I would go to the cemeteries and eventually his sister, my friend's sister, and cousin, they started cutting school with us because we were on Trent High and we would just cut school, go to the cemeteries, go to the park. And I remember this one specific day cutting school. I went to this park in our area and we were sitting on the swing sets and here comes my dad walking by and I'm like, fuck. Okay. And he's like, you know, why aren't you in school? And remember, he can't really speak that well because of his stroke, but he's asking why I'm not in school, and I didn't. I told him I was on lunch or something stupid. The things that we come up with, we think sound good as teenagers, are the stupidest excuses ever. But I'm like, well, why are you out here? Also, like I'm gonna question you too because why not? I'm 14, 15 years old, and I can ask you questions because I'm a tough adult, whatever. So I I remember going back home after school hours that day, and my mom called me in the kitchen. She's like, "Why were you not in school? Your father said he saw you." And I'm like, "Okay, well, why don't you ask your husband what he was doing? He's probably going to see his whore." And I really deflected that situation off of me, and it's terrible, and I feel terrible thinking about it or even speaking about it because it was just so malicious. The mindset I had of survival and how to attack other people and get the focus off of me, because that was an almost instantaneous that as soon as I said that, you could see the switch in her eye, and that sparked a massive fight between my parents. And I just went upstairs and I just went in my room and I shut the door, and they fought for until one of them went to sleep or left. It was a bad fight. It wasn't a good night. And that was because of me, because I got caught doing something I wasn't supposed to be doing, but instead of, being remorseful or thinking of any consequences of my own, I just started something that I knew would get the focus off of me, and start a fight between my parents. And that happened a lot sometimes because I knew that I didn't want to take accountability. So at this time, I'm messing up in school. I'm cutting school. I don't want to be there. I'm smoking. I'm drinking. I have no accountability. Every reason for every bad decision I'm making in my life is a direct result of my parents. That's what I'm telling people. Well, my life is this way because this is what you've done to me. I'm just so bitter and so angry. So this is what I'm trying to, describe to you. I want you all to think about not being an adult, being 14 and 15, and then these things happening to you and the undeveloped brain that we have. And so during that time, I was very, very, very rude, bitter, angry child. And I would act out. So like I said, we would cut school. We would just be these troubled kids in the neighborhood. Not who I used to be at all. I used to be this sweet kid. I mean, I always had a smart tongue, and I just remember just not being happy anymore, so I just took it out on everyone around me. And I would get in these fights with my sisters, and it became World War III in my home. We would have more vicious fights, but now instead of it just being a way to, stop the fight, we would encourage it and we would go down and we would just all be involved in this terrible fight. So now we're in this new house with new neighbors on both sides listening to this, and it was just so embarrassing that we had this type of environment in a new area now. So I decide, let's make a third Olden horror movie, right? Why not? The other two were just box office hits. But so I decide, let's make a third movie. Let's do something in this house, and let's shift focus, and it's some type of productivity because I'm not doing anything else in my life at this point. I'm barely ever in school. Um, no, just doing nothing with my life. Sleep. I'm staying up till 6 a.m. I'm sleeping. This is what we're doing. So let's make a third movie. We're gonna get it out to the world. I'm gonna become this famous actor, this famous movie producer. If I probably think back, if that's something I was actually interested in, I would have been smart, stayed in school, and gone to college for it. But that didn't happen. Here we are. But anyway, so we are gonna make this third movie. I asked both my sisters yet again to be in it, and the one guy that my sister was dating, her boyfriend, who had been the killer in the previous two. So we're making this third movie, and at this point, my nephew is, I think, 4, and then, like I said, he was very close with me. He coined the term that all my niece and nephews call me now. Um, he couldn't say Uncle Eric is my name. He would call me Unky, and that's just what he would say. So he would always want to be in my room, play the video games. I guess he just always wanted to be around. And so I decided to feature him in this third film, you know, and I killed him, had him killed off in the movie. 4-year-old child, like who does that? Traumatizing kids, let me tell you. I'm sure he probably remembers this, but it wasn't like brutal or anything that would have scarred him. But aside from the fact that I remember my doorknob would come off on my bedroom door, and my mom, who was the duct tape queen, she would duct tape everything. I don't know why she thought that duct tape was going to be the answer to fixing a doorknob, because it just wasn't. But I remember the scene was of me running into my room, which was my quote unquote apartment, which is like the size of a shoebox. There's literally like you could fit a bed in there and a possible small dresser. But anyway, that was my apartment, and I'd shut the door, and he was my room, my roommate's son or something I had said, and I pulled the doorknob out to lock the door so the killer can't come in, but he's got obviously going to use like a butter knife or something to pick the lock. And my window had a little roof overlooking the backyard, or whatever the backyard is over the alleyway. And so I remember opening the window and climbing out of it because it reminded me of the scene of when in Halloween 4 with Rachel and Jamie when they were in the attic and she busts the window out and climbs onto the roof and gets the kid out on her. So that was one of my favorite scenes and one of my favorite movies. So I was like, I'm going to add my own twist to this. So I'm climbing out the window or whatever. And I'm getting on the roof, but I don't really want to bring a child onto the roof, a 4-year-old child onto the roof. So I'm pretending I can't lift him. And then the killer comes in the room, grabs him, and my nephew's like, Hunky, Hunky. Right? And so it's just terrible. And so the killer throws him on the bed and pretends to shoot him. And then like we stop recording as I slide down and fall off the roof, but I don't really fall off the roof. We did this weird effect thing where it looked like I fell off the roof. It was actually not a terrible thing. It kind of looked like I did, which I'm proud of that moment. But anyway, um, the thinking back and having conversations with my nephew now, who's 22, he remembers these moments, and it's like, it makes me think of passing on traumas, but in a different way because as I said, my mom used to hide in the attic and call out my name, and I'd be terrified and look for her. But so that scared me. So the horror and the terror in life, in the fun way, was also there, but in a twisted way. We would use these elements, and so the third movie was made. And I remember after we went to a local park It was a big park in the suburbs in Hamilton Township, the suburbs of Trenton. And it's where my grandmother lived at the time before she passed, and my mom grew up. But anyway, so we go to this park and we filmed this scene. We never concluded the movie, but anyway, we filmed this scene and we end it. And then afterwards, we decide to just film being at the park with my nephew and my niece, who's in a car seat because she's like 6 months old. And my dad was there. And I remember we used to watch this movie all the time because, not because, again, we liked the movie, but it was, for me, it was what was after we filmed the movie and just filming our life. I remember just being filmed and watching me play with my nephew at the park and being happy and swinging on the tire and my sister and her daughter and him making fun of the baby and also seeing my father. Um, he was there and it was just very it was nice because I had lost everything as a child up to the age of 15 and I was rebuilding again and having this piece of film really made me feel like I had some kind of memory again because I have no baby pictures of myself. I have nothing. We had stockings my great grandmother had made us with our names on it. They were gone. And the happy memories of my childhood where I remember my mom being a mother and nurturing and her being my hero and cuddling on the couch and watching TV and watching Jason and things like that. They were all gone. None of that was happening anymore. I didn't have a structure. So there's moments like this where I could capture glimpses of happy times or some type of normal behavior I really clung on to. I didn't know how to get out of the situation I was in. I didn't think to stay in school because I didn't want to be there. I didn't know what to do. I became, instead of planning for life and planning for the future, I just began living and just doing these different things and watching, you know, other people live their life. And then after a while, you start to think, it's is it too late for me? Um, Other people are, progressing in their life and you're not. So is this, you start to accept your fate, I guess, to this is who you are, and that's okay. You have this group of people that are all doing the same thing that you are doing, drinking, smoking weed, smoking cigarettes, hanging out, not really taking anything serious and not having any real role models. There was no, I can't think of anyone um, that I really felt comfortable enough with, that I looked up to, um, that I wanted to be like. The only person I ever wanted to be like was my mother, and she wasn't my mother anymore at this point. So I didn't really know who to turn to. So I just started creating the movies and watching them back, and watching my life in a way that I thought it should be instead of the way that it actually was. So that brings me back to the whole, beginning of this episode, which where we talked about the horror movie, The Blair Witch Project, and how I thought when I first watched it that this was, true events and that this is something that was happening in real time, and we were watching the trauma and the murder of these three filmmakers, and it just takes me back to my own homemade horror movies and how I would watch them back, and I knew when I found out that the Blair Witch wasn't real, I remember thinking it instantly was no longer terrifying to me because it was fake. And I could relate to it because watching my horror movies, it was not reality either. You know, I was also creating this illusion of life and what I wanted to do. And so watching the scenes at the park with the family where we're happy and we're laughing and we're running um, was not the whole story. It's part of the story. It is an actual memory and it is a happy time. But when I showed that to people, if I had it still and I'd show it to people and I erased it, I don't tell them the other parts of my life, they would think, oh, look at this family, out at a park. They have fond memories. They're smiling. They're happy, but they don't know the darkness to it. They don't know that this kid, this 14, 15-year-old kid is battling his sexuality and battling a lot of demons and a lot of trauma from his childhood and his parents and the darkness that goes with it. They just see a happy kid playing with his nephew at a park. Um, the same thing, I take you back to the first movie that I made, and I remember it was after that I had videotaped New Year's Eve, and my mom was on videotape here, and she was happy dancing. I had her dancing. My sister, the of us, we were having fun. We were, it was a what a wonderful New Year's Eve it looked like. And then I stopped recording, and then I stopped recording because right before the film stops, later on in the night, because my mom had gotten too drunk and went up to bed, and we were all still downstairs having fun until she had woken up in a drunk rage. And you hear her scream upstairs. You can't really hear what she said, but she says something. And I knew because you could tell that now it was about to begin. So I cut that out of the film. Just gone. Um, I wanted to keep the happy memories. And I think, that was what I had mentioned before is, remembering the happy times, getting rid of the bad times. But the problem is the bad times are what were shaping who I was becoming, the decisions that I was making. I wasn't taking the things that were bad happening to me and turning myself into something productive. I was wallowing and staying in this situation. And I think as an adult, and this experience of telling my story to the world and really unpacking things that I keep inside my head and saying them out loud is really helping me understand the mindset that I was in at the time, because most of my adult life was not acknowledging things that happened to me in the past or not thinking too much about it. And it brought me to this situation of where I'm at now, and still not fully understanding what I'm meant for or who I'm supposed to be. I'm 35 years old and I have an idea still of what life is, and I'm happier and I'm in a different place, and I've built a wonderful life at this point after a lot of darkness. So looking back now and unpacking to feel full full happiness, because that's the thing. There's a lot of things that you think you're over, that small things trigger you, and you realize that you haven't worked through it, you haven't unpacked it. Like the Blair Witch Project, you're probably wondering, what does this have to do with anything that we're talking about? We're not really talking much about the Blair Witch Project, and the whole uniqueness of this show is to talk about the triggers and in how that opens up the storyline for whatever trauma that I've dealt with. And like the point of the Blair Witch Project is, whenever I think of the Blair Witch Project and I think of that movie, the first thing I go to is like I said, what I thought of the movie and what I remember feeling when I first saw the movie. My second is my trauma that I associate with it. And like I said, it was a found footage movie. And the thing that I think of with found footage is my own experience with making my own homemade horror movies. And then inside of those horror movies, I remember other experiences such as my, you know, playground at the park, with the kids, or being at home on New Year's Eve with the family, or in one of the scenes for one of the episodes, seeing my mom sleeping drunk on the floor with a blanket over her, and me using that in part of my film as the dead landlord. These are things that I associate within the realm of horror. Every piece of horror that I've dealt with in fiction and in real life, I can escape it somehow within a movie or a show or a video game or a piece of merchandise. Like it's just how I make all the connections to my life, and I try to use it to unpack similar situations. As I mentioned before, recreating a roof scene that I've seen in Halloween. What really was it about that scene? Was it that Rachel was, the savior for Jamie, or the boogeyman was coming? There were so many different things that I related to. and I wanted to act out because I wanted to maybe figure out how they got through a situation, or how, I know it's fiction, but somebody wrote these things and somebody had an outcome, and maybe I can have a similar or a different outcome in my own life. Well, that's all the time we have for this episode of The Horror Within Me. If you enjoyed my show, leave a comment and hit the like button on whatever platform you're listening in on. And you can also check out my website at thehorrorwithinme.com, where I blog about different horror movies and experiences as well. And also, again, if you're into horror gaming, follow me on Twitch at FoxyBatman21 with two X's. That's FOXXYBATMAN 21. And until next time, stay spooky.